Hello everybody, it's Jaime and I wanted to take a moment to talk to you about designated versus integrated ELD. I want to share some brief insights as to who our ELs are and also talk about using StudySync. So our ELs come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. Our newcomers are any foreign-born students who have recently arrived in the U.S. and enrolled in our schools for less than 12 months. Note that students born in the U.S. are not considered newcomers, but there are instances where students that are born in the U.S. do leave the country and return. In that case, we would look at an individual on a case-by-case basis to offer supports. New ELs who are not newcomers, as I mentioned before, are USA born. A language other than English is their primary language. And then remember, 80 to 86% of ELs enter school in TK or K. And they can enter at any of the levels: emergent, expanding, and bridging. Who are ELs? Well, at risk of long-term ELs are students who do not demonstrate academic progress toward meeting reclassification in grades 3 through 11. Chemawa has a variety of different classifications of students. Many of them are long-term ELs. They tend to not do well on SBAC, and or they demonstrate little to no progress on district assessments. So these are kids that are at risk. Now, kids that have been classified as long-term English learners are students who do not attain reclassification within 4 years. And they've been enrolled in any of grades 6 through 12. So in essence, you have to be in a grade greater than 6 to be classified as a long-term EL. And you've remained in the same English language proficiency level for 2 or more consecutive years as determined by the State Language Assessment, or LPAC. Basically, a student that perhaps is a level 3 for more than 1 year and beyond grade 6 would be considered a long-term EL. Our ELs in special ed equate to 20 to 23% of our total special ed population, or total English learner population district-wide. And we have to make sure that all of our documentation, that our goals are written to include the needs for our special needs and English learners. RFIP students are English learners who attain proficiency on the LPAC and meet the state criteria. So basically, reclassified students who, by the way, we continue to monitor every year, tend to be very high achieving. And last are DLI kids that are receiving a 50-50 split between English and Spanish. And we have a DLA program that goes K through 12 at some of our schools. Now, what is the difference between designated and integrated ELD? Well, designated ELD is a protected time during the regular school day when teachers provide lessons for English learners to develop English language proficiency. So these are kids that are generally pulled out or have a period in secondary school for basic ELD instruction. Integrated ELD is what the majority of teachers would provide in the content area. Now, the goal of integrated ELD is for English learners to learn the content and academic language used in each lesson. So, you would provide integrated ELD, by scaffolding instruction, by providing sentence frames, by providing graphic organizers, by really highlighting academic language. That's integrated ELD that can occur in math, science, social studies, and others. So, integrated versus designated at the expanding level. Remember, we do have 3 levels. We have emergent, expanding, and bridging. For the sake of this example, I'm going to go ahead and just highlight the expanding level. On the left-hand side, you have a variety of strategies that can be used with your students. Note that I didn't mention graphic organizers. That's there. And also, you do have StudySync in secondary. And that's where most of our focus today will take us. On the right are examples of designated ELD at the expanding level. Using reality and visuals is always a good thing, especially for students who are at the emergent or expanding levels. I also wanted to take a moment to highlight a nifty tool that in our search for more visual and auditory supports for our students, particularly our English learners and other students that may require differentiated instruction. This resource I did highlight once before, but it can be useful, a useful reminder anyway, to just kind of look at what it does. It's basically a classroom screen that you can display in your classroom, in your in-person classroom. Here are some of the features that I want to talk about. First and foremost, on the left here, you can click here to change the background. So if I select that, it's going to give me the Coliseum and so forth. If I come on over to my next selection here, Random Name Picker, which is kind of neat if you have a situation in your class where you have several students and you want to create or use a tool to pick a name. Then click Choose, and it will randomly select a name for you, and students would be able to see this displayed on your board. It's got a dice picker. It's got a single dice, or maybe I want to roll two dice. One of the dice perhaps is the table group. The other dice is maybe the student in that group. And I can go to settings, and I can very easily change the color here in this panel. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. The sound level. Maybe you have a thing in your classroom where you want students not to exceed a particular sound. So this is very easily displayed for students. Remember, this arrow down here on any of these little panels can be extended to enlarge or decrease the size. And if I turn the bell on, then an alert will come on anytime I exceed that acceptable noise level in my classroom. Okay, and I can go ahead and mute it too if I want, and students would know that they can speak freely. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and go to the next section. You can go to the media section and add an image perhaps. By clicking here, you could drag or drop an image and display it for your students. I can go over to a QR code. This might be useful if you have students connecting in a distance environment or a virtual environment, where all they would need to do is scan the QR code that you display for them to reach your board. If I come over to the draw section, it speaks for itself. I can go ahead and draw anything I'd like on here. Remember, I can extend the size, I can erase, I can change the color, and I can change the size of the line as well. And then remember, you can grab this handle. Apologize. You can undo very easily by clicking here and close this out. The text feature is also available with a variety of word processing tools. The work symbols is kind of neat because I can very easily drag this up here, and my students would be able to identify what I expect from them in the classroom. Do I expect silence, or is it time to ask a neighbor, or maybe it's time to work together by clicking those. The traffic light is neat. I can enlarge it. Red light in the classroom, where they're expected to work independently perhaps. Green, maybe they can move around the classroom, and so forth. That would be up to you. I'm going to close that out. Coming over to my timer. Here's a timer that can very easily be adjusted. Okay. And once that goes off, you're going to get that sound. I can change the sound very easily by selecting here and so forth. Again, this can be moved around the screen for your students to see. You've got a stopwatch available, a clock, and I can change it to 12-hour mode. And students they're very comfortable with digital, maybe not as comfortable with analog. I'm going to close this out. And then last but not least is the calendar view available for you here as well. The last thing that I'll mention are the settings here on the right. You could very easily take a screenshot, name your screen, and then download it as a picture in the event that you wanted to download it or share it with students. And that's pretty much it. There are some other features there. There are also more features in the upgraded Pro version, but it's kind of a neat tool to use in your classroom for in-person instruction, and especially if we're looking to engage our auditory or visual learners. Thank you. Now within StudySync, you do have access to both core and designated ELD units. After logging into StudySync, you would select your grade here at the top, and then come down and select a unit of study. Now, if you want to continue with the core ELA unit, you would select the orange tab. If you want to go on with a designated ELD unit for some of your students, you would select the designated ELD unit. Now, keep in mind that designated ELD is exactly what that sounds like. It is designated, and it should be used usually during a period where you are teaching ELD. For most teachers, you will consider the core ELA unit, and in just a second, I will show you how to use some of the elements within StudySync to integrate ELD. Now, upon selecting the ELD tab, the designated ELD tab, you would come to the overview page. The overview page provides you a video preview introducing the theme, the driving question, and the unit. Now, over on the left, you'll see this blade that provides you the instructional path and the extended oral project. Each designated ELD unit provides you with an instructional path and an extended oral project. The extended oral project is aimed or intended to be completed over the course of several days with the culminating class presentation by each student. Now, within the instructional path, remember you would select this on the left. The first thing you'll see are the text selections for this unit, this ELD, this designated ELD unit. And here they are. Now, once you select that section, you'll notice that every unit gives you different levels. You can assign emerging, expanding, or bridging. Your lowest EL students would fall into the emerging, middle would be expanding, and your higher EL students would fall into the bridging section. You'll notice also that you have access 1, 2, and 3. These access handouts are aimed at making the content more intelligible for your EL students. And remember, you do have access to the lesson plan as well for each section of the unit. Now, once you continue, you'll notice that clicking on one of the sections will open up a different skills area. Now, the emerging version, students are asked to match visuals with the appropriate word and its meaning. You'll notice that if you click on the expanding axis handout, the directions look a little bit different, but they're asked to match visuals with the appropriate word. So the scaffolds are slightly different. But again, these are aimed at giving kids access to the content. Skills lessons include the following sections. They will always ask you to use vocabulary, define, model, practice, and then occasionally write. Remember, the goal is for kids to learn academic vocabulary and to begin to apply it. This is just a sample of what you might see within the Access handouts. Now, remember earlier I did mention the extended oral project blade here at the bottom that gives you access to these basically projects that will culminate with a class presentation by each student. And oral speaking is really an important task for our students, therefore included in StudySync. Now, integrated ELD. To get to the integrated ELD, as I mentioned before, you would select the core path and not the designated ELD path within each of the units. Once you're there, you will have access to each of the following levels: emerging, expanding, bridging, and approaching. And you would find these underneath the instructional path component. And I'll show you exactly where to click on these in just a few minutes. Now remember, these handouts are aimed at providing accessibility or making the content accessible to our EL students participating in the content core lesson. So on this screen, you'll notice on the left, we have an example of this lesson in the core path, and on the right, an example of the access path. Remember, the access path is what you might provide for students who are English learners, where your goal is to provide them access to the core curriculum. So on the left, the students would respond to the skills focus section, ask questions, make connections, and so forth. On the right-hand side, you'll notice that it talks about emerging and expanding levels and instruction that is scaffolded. Here's an example of what Axis 3 probably something you would use with your expanding or bridging levels, of what students would have to do. You'll note the sentence frames that are always included, and then in this particular section there's a rubric that kids would have to fill out. Now, as I mentioned before, I indicated that I'd walk you through how to actually select the access documents, access paths for your students. First and foremost, upon going to your grade level, you would click on the orange ELA ELD unit, not the designated ELD unit. Once here, you would select the instructional path, and within the instructional path, here's where you would find the access 1, 2, 4. Sometimes there'll be access 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's really up to you to ascertain your students' levels and to select the correct path for your students. You can very easily print them out or assign them here on the right-hand side. Now remember, every lesson has these access documents. So the blast, the first text selection, the next one, and so forth. Here's an example of one of the access paths for students in the first lesson that we saw, which is the blast. You'll notice there are many scaffolds here. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is that using the access path will provide your EL students with greater access, given the fact that there are audio opportunities to highlight, and closed captioning.